Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. My two favourite military chronographs on AliExpress are the Seagull 1963 and the Baltany military chronograph. I think they call it the S5033, but I've always just referred to it as the military chronograph because that's exactly what it is. Both these watches are quite different, but both are fantastic in their own respective ways, and they're both watches that I have recommended wholeheartedly for several years now. But there's a new contender for the throne. Enter the Proxima military chronograph. Again, they call this one the PX1718, so you can see why I'm not going to call it that. Today, I'm going to give you a full review of the Proxima and compare it to both Seagull and Baltany. Then I'm going to decide whether or not I think it is the new number one. Now, you saw the pop-up. This video is sponsored by Proxima. They sent me this watch for free. I do not have to send it back to them. Now, they know how to make a good watch, so my hopes for this one are high. Let's flip the camera and get on with it. All right, let's do it. Now, you know I love talking about money. I talk about money in every single video. Price is always very important to me, but I'm not going to talk about the price quite yet. I thought what we'd do today is have a good look at the watch, see where it overlaps and see where it differentiates itself from the Baltany and the Seagull, and then look at all three of the prices together a bit later. I thought that would make sense. Let's start by looking at the Proxima then. Hey, I haven't seen this box before, or perhaps I have, although I've seen it with a Steel Dive name on the sticker, or I've seen it with an Addy Dive name on the sticker, or I've seen it with a Suggest name on the sticker. It seems to be the kind of default AliExpress shipping uniform these days. No bad thing though, because it does look after the watch in transit. And when you open the lid on the flight case, you are greeted with a very, very attractive looking watch that visually, aesthetically, I think, again, kind of splits the difference between the other two. You are also greeted by a bit of a rarity from AliExpress, a signed, dated 2-year warranty card. You're paying a little bit more for this one than your standard AliExpress stuff, so that is always a pleasure to see. And like I said, Proxima know how to put together a watch. This is a good looking watch, and when we look at the case in more detail in a couple of minutes time, you'll see it's a nicely manufactured watch as well. In terms of the size, in terms of the dimensions, it very much sits again kind of in line with the other two that we're discussing today. So diameter 38.8 with a 12.8mm thickness and a 47mm lug-to-lug bang on. Lug width, they've gone for 20. Now the Baltany has 20, the Seagull has 18. I think 20 is going to be the better choice for most people. And as supplied on this, well, talking about splitting the difference, this one splits the difference between a NATO and an elastic Marine National style strap. It's really, really good. I have not seen one of these before, but I want to see more of them again. As supplied on the strap, 78 grams. Great piece of glass in this one as well, boxed double dome sapphire crystal, 50 meters of water resistance, once again splitting the difference between the other two watches, and the movement in the back is a Seagull ST1902. Now, the dramatic pause on the 2 was quite deliberate there. You can see the movement, by the way, obviously through this display case back. 1902, you would normally expect a 1901. The 1902 actually has a third register on the dial. It's a 12-hour register. It's not a 12-hour chronograph. It just spins twice per day. Pretty useless. I can understand why Proxima chose not to utilize it. So it is a 1902, but they just have chosen not to put a 6th hand on the dial and a 3rd sub-register. That means we have a 22 joule manual wind caliber. No hacking on this one, by the way. The small second at the 9 o'clock is permanently ticking. Roughly 40-hour power reserve. You know, there are some claims of up to 50 hours. And if you are running the chronograph continuously, because it will run continuously, you'll probably get closer to 30 or 35 hours of power reserve. Fascinating to look at though. Column wheel chrono, plenty of decoration, plenty of blued screws, based on a Venus caliber from the 1940s. It is a relic, it is one of its kind. You will not find another one of these anywhere near this price tag. Now, case finish today, it is nicely done, but it is also rather interesting being a bit of a euphemism if I'm being honest. Now, there's a very fine horizontal brush, as you can see on that kind of arcing mid-case vertical sides there. However, they've put a massive high polish undercut on it. Now, that is not there for comfort. I'm guessing that is there for visual trickery. They're trying to trick your eye into thinking that the watch is much slimmer than it is. Proxima, you're not fooling anyone with that. It's far too big. Maybe if it was half that size, you could have given the impression that it was a slimmer watch. Not that you really need to, because it wears well and it's less than 13mm thick. Anyway, there is a linear brushing to the upper lug surfaces and a high polish chamfer running from lug tip to lug tip. On the crown side, decent sized crown, nice and grippy, which is what you want because it's a manual wind watch. Unsigned crown, unsigned pushers, but again, this style of watch, I can forgive that. Especially when the strap is so good. Really, really comfy. I run a Marine Nationale on one of my kind of Decla Pilots watches. This is great, NATO style, so you get those holes, double pass. Nice hardware, mixture of brushed and polished on the buckle here, all brushed on those double retainers, all brushed on that one as well. Very, very comfortable in operation. I'm surprised I haven't seen more of these in the past. I would love to see more of them in the future. Alright, dial and hands, and I will jump back and forth between live in-hand footage and macro footage as appropriate. Very nicely done here. I think it looks good and it looks really well made. It's a molded dial, I believe here, so the Proxima logo and 22 jewels are part of a molding rather than an application. The big numerals, again, part of a molding but with loom applied on top of them. The two sub-registers are slightly recessed, and that whole central section of the dial, I'm going to call it kind of dirty white. It's not really cream, it's not silver, it's not white, it's kind of dirty white, slightly off-white. That all has a slight texture, a slight mottling to it. Again, I like a military style watch with a textured dial. You get less reflection, again, very much in keeping, very much suitable for its original purpose. And it's a good sized handset as well, big, prominent, noticeable sword hands with brushed surrounds. That brushed surrounding means they do rather kind of emphasize and de-emphasize as I move the watch around in my hand here. You can see one hand get lighter, the other hand get darker. Again, enhancing the legibility as they do. Now, beyond the large Arabics, you'll see two smaller sets of markers in two rings. The first in red with little Arabics printed on the 5s. Now you think they're for minutes, but because it's a central chronograph hand and not a minute hand, they're actually there for seconds. So if I stop the chronograph here, you can see it's stopping at 52 seconds and start again. Beyond that ring, there is a black ring. The black ring is graded 1 to 20. And I don't mind admitting it, for the life of me, I've no idea why they did that. I've never seen a chronograph graded 1 to 20 like that before anywhere on the dial. It's not a tachymeter, it's not a telemeter, it's not a pulsometer. All it does is effectively break the dial into 5-second chunks. If you've seen this before, if you know what Proxima is going for here, let me know. Perhaps they just made an aesthetic decision which has turned out to be a slightly baffling aesthetic decision. But leaving that to one side for the moment, it's an attractive, well-proportioned and actually really rather legible military-style mid-century aesthetic overall. Loom! I promised you loom, and here is the loom. C3 old Ridium style is always at a bit of a disadvantage from the beginning, but because those hands are so large, and because those Arabics, the main Arabics, are so large, it doesn't actually do too badly. If I turn the speed up, you can see the Arabics fade, but those big hands are actually hanging on a little bit grimly, but they're still hanging on come the end of my test. And on wrist, it's great. It really does wear rather nicely. I think a lot of the credit for that today, though, has to go to this Marine Nationale elastic NATO type thing. Super, super comfy. Plus, it bulks the watch up a little. These military chronos all tend to be 38s, 39s, this one no exception. You know, some people aren't into sub-40s at all. This is a good way to make a watch this size just have a little bit more presence to both look and feel a bit larger. Legibility is also really pretty good thanks to the large Arabics and that big central hour and minute hand. There we are, that's the overhead wrist shot. Legibility is all pretty good, especially considering this one has that kind of yellowy off-white on another yellowy off-white dial. It's never going to be as legible as white hands and white numerals against a black dial, for example. And you can see what I mean about Proxima's attempt to make this one look slimmer on wrist by having that big kind of high waistline and giant undercut. yeah, I'm not quite sure whether they've succeeded. Just because you pull your trousers right up over your waistline doesn't make you any slimmer, it just makes you look like you've pulled your trousers right up over your waistline. Or let's do a little side-by-side comparison then with each of the two watches that I have been referring to today, starting with the 1963. They have the same movement, or effectively the same movement, even though the Proxima is different, but they don't utilize that third sub-register. That means that these watches are going to be as accurate, or as inaccurate as each other, and as reliable or as unreliable as each other. There is a bit of a failure rate with these Seagull ST19 movements. As discussed, they're effectively 80 years old now and mass-produced cheaply in China, so yeah, they're not going to be as reliable as a modern Japanese quartz or auto. Aesthetically, they both look retro, but the Seagull perhaps more retro. The Proxima does have a bit more water resistance. It's got a thicker, chunkier case. It's got a 20mm lug width rather than 18. It's probably going to have a bit more wrist presence for most people. Gives a feeling of more robustness as well because the case is a little bit thicker, the lugs are a little bit thicker, it's a little bit heavier. So it's kind of like a 1963 that's been working out at the gym, but it doesn't have any of the backstory or the history or the recognition that a 1963 has. How does it compare to the Baltany then? Well, unlike the other two, the Baltany uses a Seagull Mecha quartz movement, so battery powered rather than manual wind mechanical. Perhaps you think that means it doesn't have soul, but it will keep ticking reliably and accurately in a watch box for several years. And if I was going to run either of those movements as a daily long term, this would be my choice. This would definitely be the more sensible, the more practical, and the more reliable long term. The Baltany also has 100 meters of water resistance, screw down crown, screw down pushers. The Proxima only 50 and nothing screws down. The Baltany is arguably going to be the more legible of the two as well, thanks to those big white numerals and better loom than the Proxima. But it's not far off between these two, and certainly they are aesthetically more similar than the Proxima was to the Seagull. The Proxima really does then fall in between these other two watches. There are distinct areas of overlap and distinct areas of difference. It doesn't have the history of the 1963, but it is undoubtedly more legible and more practical, but not as legible or as practical as it is to the Baltany, but it has that mechanical movement that the Baltany lacks. I guess then it all comes down to price. So how much do these three cost? Well, at the moment you can pick up the Baltany for just over $150 with a choice of 3 straps including a mesh, but the Seagull with sapphire crystal can be bought at the moment from a reputable vendor for $115. Now be careful, there are a lot of pigs and pokes on AliExpress. People will sell you something that looks like a 1963 but doesn't have that Seagull movement. I've bought from this store. I'll leave links to all of these 3 watches in the description of the video so you can buy this one with confidence if you want to. But that makes the Proxima the most expensive of the 3. $213 something with a $15 voucher. You're still looking at just under $200 for this one. That means it's $50 more than the Baltany and $85 more than the Seagull. Now do factor in you'll probably be replacing the strap on both the Seagull and the Baltany, whereas this is the standout strap. It belongs on this watch. It's really good, so you won't be replacing it, but it's still going to be the most expensive of the 3 regardless. I think until Proxima do something about the price, it kind of falls in between the 2 stools then. Doesn't quite have the practicality of the Baltany, doesn't quite have the backstory of the Seagull. It tries to do it all, but doesn't quite manage to do enough. So there you have it. Is the Proxima the new number 1? Well, it certainly combines some of the more desirable elements of the Baltany and the Seagull. It's very nicely made, and it's great to see brands like Proxima playing around a little bit with the strap. It's perhaps just a little bit too expensive though in what is really a cutthroat market when you compare it to the prices of the 2 others. Let's see what Proxima decide to do with this one in an upcoming sale. Well done for making it all the way to the end of the video. If I didn't recommend that you watch either the Seagull or the Baltany review now, there would be a problem, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Thanks for watching this one. I'll see you again in the next one.